Lewis Hamilton's blockbuster switch from Mercedes to Ferrari is as complicated as it is exciting, and that comes at a price. Hamilton's the only driver switching teams for 2025 who won't get a chance to start his preparations early by driving in the post-season Abu Dhabi test. There's always something symbolic when you see a new face in a new place in that test. It's like day zero of 2025 and a fun glimpse into the future. And there'll be plenty of that in Abu Dhabi, given half the 2025 grid is going to look different to the start of 2024. The low friction moves are obviously not a problem, like Hamilton's replacement Kimi Antonelli driving for Mercedes. But also, Hamilton's Ferrari predecessor Carlos Sainz will drive for Williams in the test. Haas agreed that Nico Hülkenberg could join up with Sauber, while Alpine will let Esteban Ocon get his first Haas run, although to show just how complicated things can get, he's had to vacate his race seat for the season finale and cut ties with Alpine completely. We won't see every 2025 driver in their new team, but only for specific reasons. Ollie Behrman is ineligible for the Haas Young Driver car after making his third F1 start in Brazil, for example, while the Red Bull will be driven by Yuki Tsunoda, as a favour to engine partner Honda. But in terms of people turning up somewhere properly new in 2025, Hamilton will be the exception. The new era feeling that comes with the postseason test would obviously have been amplified much more if Hamilton had been behind the wheel of a Ferrari. His switch is the biggest move of all the driver lineup changes for 2025, the one that kicked off a frenetic driver market this year and is one of the biggest F1 stories in recent history. So the first time that driver and that team work together will be a real wow, this is really happening moment. Hamilton's admitted he wasn't excited by the idea of his first run in Ferrari Red coming in Abu Dhabi of all places, so he's less concerned about that side of things. But he's admitted the test would have had value and Ferrari wanted to facilitate it if it could. So unfortunately for the team and anyone excited about its Hamilton era starting, everybody's got to wait a little longer. But we'll get into the consequences of his debut being delayed and how it will actually happen later in this video. Given his longevity with Mercedes, his unique profile, and probably a heavy dose of competitive reality, Hamilton's not being afforded the usual courtesy of an early break, which, given all of that, was always likely. Driver contracts run until December 31st, so you always need your team to do you a favour if you want to be let out early. Coming back to the Ocon example, he was originally going to drive for Haas in the postseason test and visit the Enstone and Virig factories to say his goodbyes. But it's not been possible for even Ocon to reconcile those two things, and Hamilton has his own locked-in commitments with Mercedes that are a bit more extensive. He's set to have a whirlwind farewell tour of Mercedes' key locations, the team and engine factories in the UK, Mercedes headquarters in Germany, and also longtime partner Petronas in Malaysia. Mercedes boss Toto Wolff described it as having a lot of activities planned, so much so that when he and Hamilton briefly discussed being released early to drive for Ferrari, Hamilton was immediately aware it probably wasn't going to be doable. In fact, while Hamilton says that Ferrari boss Fred Vasseur was more keen to make it happen, Vasseur didn't even bother asking Mercedes himself. Contracts are there to be respected, he says, and just because it was easy to let Carlos Sainz go and drive for Williams doesn't mean Vasseur expected Mercedes to make it so straightforward for Hamilton. Of course, Mercedes might not have been minded to help too much anyway, given the shock nature in which Ferrari swooped for him last winter and the fact the two teams are direct competitors. You might think that Hamilton should be afforded special treatment given the success he's brought Mercedes, but he kind of is, given he's getting a superstar's goodbye. And that reflects the fact Mercedes does value a proper send-off, even though the on-track element has turned sour across 2024. There had been speculation about the quality of Hamilton's relationship with the team, first in the wake of comments he made in Brazil that sparked suggestions he might quit early, and also the revelation of comments from Wolff made for a Mercedes insider book about Hamilton's exit ultimately being a good thing for the team because of the shelf life people have. That continued in Qatar, where Hamilton had such a negative weekend he wanted to park the car during the Grand Prix. Mercedes and Hamilton are almost living out two scenarios in tandem. There's the limp end to their 2024 season, which is bringing a curtain on their time together in an extremely disappointing and sometimes bitter fashion. And there's the broader end of the story, which is more a celebration of all that came before the forgettable final chapter. This has got awkward at times, but if things were truly busted between them and there was no interest in the postseason activities, then Mercedes and Hamilton could have just done an Alpine Ocon and parted company already. Hamilton doesn't want to keep driving this car, and his replacement Kimi Antonelli would benefit from a head start on 2025, so it would be pretty win-win, if not for the contractual obligations and desire to see this out properly.
Ever fancied owning a piece of one of Ayrton Senna's Formula 1 cars? Even better, ever fancied owning a piece of one of Ayrton Senna's Formula 1 cars that you can wear on your wrist? Thanks to Danish specialist watch manufacturer REC, you can own a timepiece featuring original parts from Senna's 1986 Lotus 98T, chassis number 4. REC Watches spent 2 years working with classic team Lotus to reforge the original aluminium plenum tubes from the car to form the outer chapter rings for this exclusive watch. The car they used, Chassis 4, was driven by Senna for the last 8 races of the 1986 World Championship, which went to the wire in Australia and ended with Senna's bitter rival Alain Prost champion after an iconic and dramatic puncture for Nigel Mansell's Williams. Senna's car, the last black and gold, John Player livery turbocharged Lotus, is now privately owned and still racing to this day in historic motorsport. Nods to that iconic F1 livery can be seen in the watch's black and gold colour tones and the large number 12 skeletonized on the rotor, while the movement backplate decoration mimics the turbo Renault engine from that car. Because each timepiece uses original materials, the collection is strictly limited to just 989 individually numbered watches, which are exclusively available through recwatches.com. The fastest customers can claim a 15% discount when ordering using code THERACE, so follow the link in the description and hurry if you want to claim your very own piece of Ayrton Senna's F1 legacy.
A driver isn't usually stopped from joining their new team early if it's a normal driver changing teams, but there are times teams simply refuse to release drivers when it concerns switches that are the most awkward, whether that's because a driver was moving to a rival or there was some angst or pettiness involved. Red Bull blocked Sebastian Vettel driving for Ferrari in the post-season test in 2014, for example. And that was extra controversial because Vettel claimed he'd originally been given permission to drive, so Red Bull did a U-turn. Red Bull was also involved in another driver being locked down a few years later. Daniel Ricciardo massively upset Red Bull with his decision to switch to Renault for 2019. Given the contentious nature of his exit, plus the fact Red Bull and its ex-engine supplier Renault had such a toxic recent history at the time, it was no surprise he wasn't allowed to join up with the French manufacturer for the end of 2018 test. Hamilton's Mercedes to Ferrari move is more in the Vettel mould. While there's never been any obvious public bad blood over his exit, the news did sting back in February. He is under contract, he does have other obligations, and Ferrari is a more sensitive destination compared to joining a midfield team. As Wolff said, it's also a difference maybe if you're going to Williams. It's fair to wonder if all partners were willing to make it happen, whether it could have been facilitated in some way. While it's not a like-for-like by any means, Mercedes previously allowed Valtteri Bottas to drive for Sauber at the end of 2021, even though he had his own farewell party at the team's Brackley base. But maybe Hamilton staying in Abu Dhabi an extra 48 hours really couldn't be accommodated into his schedule. Any commercial sensitivities could maybe have been circumvented too. Aston Martin was able to run Fernando Alonso in an unliveried car at the end of 2022, although we recognise that Hamilton running in red, even without sponsors, would still have a lot more value and significance. It feels like it should have been possible. But to return to an earlier point, if Mercedes not facilitating a Ferrari test Hamilton wasn't keen on doing at a soulless venue in public doesn't particularly bother him, then others probably shouldn't get too outraged on his behalf. As a result of all of this, Hamilton's first run in a Ferrari F1 car will come next year. Hamilton acknowledged this means a delay in getting used to the team and its processes and makes the start of next year harder, with even more crammed into a short amount of time. The end of season test is hardly the be all and end all, but it definitely helps shortcut the process for next year. Not doing the test means Hamilton has a pretty long list of stuff he can't tick off in advance. The first seat fit, getting familiar with a new steering wheel layout, working with a new engineering team for the first time, and of course feeling what a Ferrari handles like on track and offering the team essentially a back-to-back comparison with the Mercedes he'll have just raced at the weekend. This would all make January smoother. He and Ferrari would hit the ground running on his first day at Maranello, refining things like seat comfort or steering wheel grip, and he would have a relevant real-world reference for the simulator, understanding the strengths and weaknesses of the 2024 car. Hamilton at least won't have to wait until pre-season testing to get his hands on a Ferrari, as the team has a prolific program with older cars, so it's likely Hamilton will drive a current era Ferrari at Fiorano to start bedding himself into the team. It just won't be totally up to date, and there will be some limitations. Using the 2023 car in such tests will be permitted from January in 2025, and it would be logical for Ferrari to do that. The 2022 car might be more convenient, seeing as it has an existing program built up around it, so engines and spares are all available, but Ferrari's had plenty of time to plan a 2023 car run in advance, so there's no obvious reason why it shouldn't be prepared, and the more recent the car Hamilton drives, the more relevant it'll be. There are other ways to get in a Ferrari before pre-season testing proper. The 2025 car could be used in a promotional event, more commonly referred to as a filming day, and almost certainly will, given Ferrari always does a shakedown in advance of the first test. This will be valuable, more so for Hamilton than in a normal situation, but they are capped at 200 kilometers of running, and he may need to share that day with Charles Leclerc. Special, not so good Pirelli tyres, known as Academy tyres, do need to be used in such promotional events, but that's also the case when you're testing an older car. So even though those old car runs are usually aimed at helping young drivers, and Hamilton's about as far from a rookie as you can be, it makes a lot of sense for Ferrari to make that the mechanism for Hamilton's debut, much as it would be better if it could happen after Abu Dhabi, like with every other driver.